Здравствуйте. Спасибо, что нашли время на интервью. Как у вас дела?
Hello, thank you for finding the time for this interview. How are you doing?
I'm wonderful. Thank you for having me. It's an honor.
Спасибо, что пришли. Как вы начали свою карьеру в журналистике?
How did you start your career in journalism? That's question one.
It was totally by accident. I met somebody who was involved in the industry, and he put me in touch with some people, and I started making contacts and kind of fell into it. And landed at One American News by accident, but it's been the best accident that's ever happened. So, very grateful for all the opportunities I've had there. We cover news that a lot of people don't get to, so it's been a wonderful opportunity.
Расскажите о вашем подходе к исследовательской журналистике. Как вы выбираете темы для своих репортажей?
What is your approach to the investigative journalism? How do you choose topics for your reports?
I'm interested in stories that don't seem to get covered in other places or that the mainstream media tries to cover up. I am kind of drawn to truth that is being hidden, you might say. I want to report on stories that are not highlighted by the mainstream media or that are hidden and expose things that the people in power don't want to be exposed. I'm not sure why that sort of fascinates me, but I guess I have an interest in, it sounds kind of cliche to say the truth, but I have an interest in exposing fairness. When someone corrupt is trying to cover up the truth or is trying to hurt people or they don't want people to know what's really going on. The injustice I find hard to live with. And so in my reporting, I try and find stories that allow me to bring that injustice to light. So as far as my approach to investigative journalism, it's looking for those kinds of stories and then trying to find what's not being told and then telling that.
Вы балансируете между объективностью и личными убеждениями в своей работе.
How do you balance between objectivity and your personal beliefs in your work?
That's the question that every journalist struggles with, isn't it? I may be biased, but I happen to think that my personal views closely align with the truth. But it's really a matter of asking a question and then looking for whatever information you find. And if that information doesn't match what you believe, well, you still have to report it. And that's where the truth is. There's different sides to every story. Two people can see the same thing and have a different opinion about what happened. So as a journalist, your job is not to try and come to the right conclusion about what they actually saw, but to report what they say they saw and let the viewers decide. So that's what I did when I was in Syria. That's what I try and do when I'm working at One American News at the Home Bureau. And that's what I'm going to try and do when I go to Russia, is just try and find what people are saying and report that story. Because I think in America, we have a very distorted view of what the truth is because so many journalists only report their opinion, or they report what they're told to report, or what the government wants them to report. So we don't really know what's happening. And, I don't really know what's happening because I haven't been there. But I've talked to a lot of people who are there, and what they're saying is not what the media is reporting. So that's the job, I think, of a journalist, to go there and just report what you find, whether or not it matches what you believe.
Режим Асада пал, и к власти в Сирии пришли экстремисты. Если посмотреть на количество погибших мирных жителей в последнее время, почему среди западных политиков такая видность?
Okay, question about Syria. Assad's regime fell, and extremists came to power there in Syria. We see a huge number of civilians that are killed recently. Why do the Western politicians prefer not to see it?
I think governments everywhere are more concerned with their own power and what they're doing than with what's happening to civilians and innocent people. Throughout history, governments tend to be very brutal, and how successful a government is depends on how well they're able to cover that up and pretend to be compassionate. So I think the reason that people are suffering in Syria is the same reason that people suffer everywhere, because the government has an agenda. They have goals that they want to accomplish, and saving people doesn't really matter at this point. Syria is a place where most of the so-called civilized world doesn't even really know where it is or what's happening there. And so it's easy to forget about. And the optics there don't really matter unless there's an agenda. Like if they had a lot of oil that we wanted, then we could go in and make some excuse about why we're trying to save the people there. But when Assad was in power, he wasn't, and again, this isn't my opinion, this is what I've heard from the Syrians living there. He wasn't the best leader, but he maintained control and the extremists weren't in charge. So while there were arrests and some level of brutalization of the population, he more or less maintained control, and everybody sort of got along. Now the terrorists are in charge. Al Qaeda, ISIS, whoever you want to call them, they are running the country now. And unless we have a goal there that we want to accomplish, the West, I don't think anyone's going to do anything about it, unfortunately. So until someone local steps in or the Syrian regime really steps out of line, I think this is going to be just the status quo for the foreseeable future.
Окей, почему западные страны не борются с потоком мигрантов? Британия уже стала одной из мусульманских стран Европы. Похожие проблемы существуют в Швеции, Дании и США. Правда ли, что в нью-йоркском метро таблички не только на английском, но и на испанском?
Next question, another subject. Why do not Western countries fight the flow of migrants? Britain has already become one of the Muslim countries in Europe. Similar problems exist in Denmark, in Sweden, and in the US. Is it true that in New York, subway signs are not only in English, but also in Spanish, for example?
So this again goes back to what I was saying about governments and control. The Western governments are at a point where they are looking to get more control over their population. And native populations, white Europeans, are more educated, more trained, and more resistant to influence and to government control than the hordes of third worlders that they're importing. And so I really think it's a matter of trying to eliminate the resistance that they get from the native populations by bringing in third worlders who are more than happy to let the government control their lives as long as they get free housing, free welfare, free everything, which is what the governments are providing them. It's an incentive. So where you see in England, you see a pocket of resistance, the nationalists painting the St. George's Cross all over the country. They're fighting back. The migrants are coming in and they're happy to take all the benefits that they can get from the government to displace these people. So it's a matter of control. The migrants are easy to control. The native population is difficult to control. So where the governments are implementing these policies, they don't see it as a matter of self-destruction. They see it as a furtherance of their policy. It ties into climate controls and the New World Order, everything that they can do to have more control over the population. And third worlders are more prone to let this happen. They're not brought up with Western civilization. They don't have the concepts of freedom and democracy that we do. And so they're more likely to let themselves be overrun by the government as long as they get a free place to live. They don't care. They don't see the difference. And with the subway signs, regards to that, I'm not sure. I haven't been to New York, but from what I've seen, the signs are primarily in English, but the notices are in other languages, including Russian, I think, for the different populations that live there. But the official notices, the official signage is in English.
Почему демократы сегодня не конкурентоспособны по сравнению с республиканцами? И будут ли Обама, Клинтон и другие привлечены к ответственности?
Okay, next question about the United States as well. Why are Democrats not competitive with Republicans today? And will Clinton, Obama, and others ever be persecuted?
I think the reason they don't appear to be competitive is because they're not competing. Both sides want the same thing. We don't have two parties in America anymore. We have a uniparty, and it's all about control. Again, I mean, like I said before, everything comes back to that. These people are sick. They're twisted. We've left God out of the equation. And when you leave God out of the equation, you want to become God. And all these people just want to be worshipped. You know, all they crave is control and power. And so whatever it takes to get that, they don't care. That's why all these Republicans work with the Democrats and the Democrats work with the Republicans. Um, they're just trying to get more power for themselves. And we always suffer when that happens. There was a case recently where a Democrat lawmaker actually attacked some law enforcement officers, and the Republicans tried to censure her. And a couple of the Republicans joined the Democrats to vote not to censure her. And it's just incredible that you have these people behaving this way. It just shows that there's no real accountability. It's all a facade. Everybody's working together against the people. So until we can fix that, we don't have democracy. We have a uniparty. I think President Trump is trying to fight against that, and it's an uphill battle though, because the entire establishment for over a century has been working against the people, and one man can't uproot that system in just 4 years. So we'll see what happens, but I'm not optimistic about the future of Western civilization, to put it bluntly. And as far as Obama and Clinton and all the rest of them ever going to jail, I don't think that'll ever happen. We can hope and we can wish, but the entire system is set up to protect people like that. We have an example of how these people won't be prosecuted, because a few years ago, James Comey, the head of the FBI, was investigating Hillary Clinton for her mishandling of classified information. And he came out, it was an incredible quote. He came out and said that if anybody else had done what Clinton had done, that she would have been charged and probably arrested. And then his next sentence was, but we're not going to charge her. So I think the question of justice isn't really a question until we can prosecute the people who make the laws. And I haven't seen a good accounting of that in recent years.
Возможен ли мир на Украине?
Do you think peace is possible in Ukraine?
Absolutely. I think that it is possible. And I think that we will probably see it before too much longer. I think the military industrial complex that was propping up Joe Biden's regime doesn't have quite as much influence with President Trump as they did with Biden. And I think that he has made it abundantly clear that he doesn't want a war in Ukraine, which is the complete opposite of what Biden was saying. And he seems to be taking steps to end that war. Reaching out to Russia, actually trying to talk to Russia. I mean, if you're trying to stop a war, that might be a good place to start, which Biden never did. I mean, Putin even came out and said that if President Trump were in office before, we wouldn't be in this situation. And I completely believe him. So I think we have a president finally who wants to put an end to this, and God willing, we will, because it's so unnecessary. This war never needed to happen. And nobody wants it. The Ukrainians don't want it. The Russians don't want it. The American people don't want it. The people in Europe don't want it. It's just our government overlords who, again, want to destabilize and want power for themselves, use this as an excuse to spend money, to destabilize our country, to create chaos. So, yeah, I think an end to this war is absolutely possible, and God willing, it will come within the next year or less.
Могут ли США и Россия стать друзьями?
Can Russia and United States become friends?
I would certainly hope so. I see no real reason why we shouldn't be friends. There's so many things that Russia and the United States and the rest of Europe could cooperate with. I mean, think of everything that we could accomplish if we didn't try and fight Russia on absolutely everything. I think this comes down to, I forget who made the famous quote, but it was essentially saying that if a government wants to control its people, it needs to create an enemy somewhere and use that enemy to scare the people into allowing it to take more and more power, to pass more laws, to raise more taxes. And so I think Russia has become that boogeyman, that demon that is always responsible for everything. And the West is using that to pass more laws and more control. And I think Trump understands that. At least I hope that he does. He seems willing to talk with Putin, and that's where you need to start with this process. So hopefully we can end this nonsense and finally work with Russia, because as I see it, Russia is doing a lot of good, trying to protect Western civilization and defend our Christian values. So I think the West could learn a lot from Russia in that regard. And I think Putin sees himself Yeah, I don't think he's a perfect leader by any means, and I've heard a lot of negative things about him. But what I've seen is that he's defending Russia, and I think any good leader should defend his own country first. And I think he sees himself in some way as a defender of Western civilization and against the decay of what is happening in the West, the rot that has set in from these just Marxist values. It's so ironic that communism was so prevalent in Russia, and now I'm not going to say they've defeated it, but they have somehow become the champions of all the things the West used to say that we defended, while the West has fallen in so many regards. So I would love to see both sides learn to work together. There's no reason why we should be at war.
Какова основная цель вашего шоу под наблюдением?
What is the main goal of your show Under Surveillance?
My show, Under Surveillance, was to expose what our government was doing to us without our knowledge. And I think it's probably true for many governments, but the level of spying that was happening and is undoubtedly still going on and has only gotten worse under our government is appalling. And most people have no idea how bad that it is. I think governments that fear for their safety want to use this kind of technology against their populations to control them. Again, everything comes down to control. And this is one of the greatest tools any government has ever had in the history of the world for controlling its population, which is absolutely terrifying. One of my greatest fears is that we've seen brutal governments, tyrannical governments rise and fall throughout history. You know, they always come and terrorize their citizens for a certain period of time, and then they inevitably fall because you can't sustain that level of terror over the long term. But no one has ever had this kind of technology before. And my fear is that the government will be able to adapt to whatever the citizens try and do to stop them because we are constantly under surveillance. And so any resistance will be snuffed out before it ever has a chance to grow. And so we will eventually come to a system of totalitarian control that is inescapable. That's my ultimate fear, especially with the growth of AI. We don't know what this tool can do, and we're playing with fire at this point, uncontrolled fire. And instead of trying to temper that, we just keep throwing fuel on it every day, expanding it, giving it more control over our lives. So the goal of that report was to try and expose this. But as we've seen in the years since then, as Edward Snowden has shown us, people don't change. We don't care. We want our conveniences. We want our cell phones. We want our smartphones. We want our apps. And as long as we have those, we don't care how much the government watches us, which is appalling, terrifying, and ultimately could be the downfall of our civilization.
Я читала, что вы пишете научную фантастику. Поскольку я тоже пишу, хотела бы спросить как коллегу, почему, по вашему мнению, мир деградирует? Люди возвращаются к жестокости, жадности и разрушению друг друга. Некоторое время назад человечество делало открытие и мечтало о космосе. Сейчас, кажется, все больше вращает вокруг войн, рынков и ресурсов. Почему так?
Faina says she read that you are also a science fiction writer. And because Faina writes herself, she wants to ask you as a fellow writer, why do you think the world now is degrading? People are returning to greed, brutality, destruction of one another. A few centuries ago, people were dreaming of space travel, of different discoveries, but now everything seems to be revolving around just wars, markets, resources. Why is that?
I think there is a tendency for people to romanticize the past. I think in the history of the world, I think it was the last 10,000 years, there have been something like 14,000 or more wars. And in that period, there have been, I think, 250 years of peace. It's something along those lines. And so the message we take from that is that humans are a warlike species. We constantly vie for power and fight amongst ourselves. That's just the nature of humanity. We want what other people have and we fight for it. I think in the past, there have been periods where we were you're thinking about the Enlightenment period, where you have the scientific ideals and the philosophic ideals. But going on during that time period, there were also a lot of wars and a lot of people suffering. So I don't think it's entirely fair to say that things were, so enlightened in the past and we've devolved since then. But I think there is a truth in the fact that things are getting worse now. I think in the 20th century, there was definitely an upward arc from the end of World War II to the beginning of the 21st century, where we made a lot of progress scientifically. And we still are. I mean, you look at people like Elon Musk and SpaceX, and we're still making a lot of great discoveries and advancements. But we are losing the capability to continue doing that because our governments, again, have destabilized our society. And so we are coming down from a place of just immense, unimaginable prosperity, the kind of luxurious lifestyles that are unheard of throughout the history of humankind. You have the poorest people in America today are living better than kings did 1,000 years ago, 500 years ago. So I think as that continues to degrade, then things will continue to get worse. People are losing their quality of life. That's going down as we begin to import more people from the third world, as the government becomes more corrupt, as services begin to fail. And so when you lose that level of lifestyle, the safety, the health, the prosperity, then you start to focus more on the necessities. And scientific advancements are a luxury. If you have the time to read, to learn, to research, to go to school, then that's what you do. If instead you're fighting for your survival, you don't have time for that. So unfortunately, our governments, again, are taking us down the path towards brutality, towards barbarism again. And I don't know what the arc is coming out of that at this point. I hope that we can refocus and try and attain that level of enlightenment that we used to have and that we want to have. I think most people in the world just want to be left alone. We just want to live peaceful, quiet lives. Most people. There is a minority, 20%, I think, or less of the population that craves this kind of control and power. And unfortunately, they're the ones that tend to rise to the top, while the rest of us just, again, want to be left alone. So I don't think it was always roses and cupcakes in the past. There was a lot of trouble centuries ago, even though they did have the kind of enlightenment that you're talking about. And again, I'll go back to that with regards to Western civilization. I think we are the font of these kinds of advancements. I think when you look since 1500, I think that was the time period I read, to the present, it's something like 90% or 95% of the advancements, the scientific achievements in the world have come out of Europe and the United States. So as that civilization decays, those advancements are going to necessarily decline, unfortunately. And war is a big precursor for that because it destabilizes everything. So there's a lot of moving parts and a lot of people trying to destabilize it. But if the people can hold together and bring our leaders accountable for what they're doing, then maybe we can save our civilization.
И напоследок вопрос личный. Какое ваше самое важное решение в жизни?
That's very interesting. And the final question, the most difficult one. What is your main decision you made in life?
That is not a difficult question at all. The most
No?
important decision I've ever made was marrying my wife.
Да
Yeah.
потрясающе. Спасибо большое за такое потрясающее интервью. Была рада пообщаться.
Pearson, thank you so much. This was a fantastic interview. Paina loved your answers, and she
Okay.
thinks you did wonderful. Thank you so much.
Okay. Well, thank you. They were great questions, and this has really been a lot of fun.